Michelle Marie Newton. A woman in Florida answered a knock at her door and learned that the name she had carried her whole life was not her own. For more than 4 decades, she had no idea she was a missing child. Michelle Marie Newton was born in Louisville, Kentucky, to Joseph and Deborah Newton. As a small child, her world looked ordinary, right up until her mother told her father she was moving to Georgia to begin a new job and prepare a new home for the family. On April 2nd, 1983, Deborah left with Michelle. When Joseph followed weeks later, the two had already vanished. A final phone call between her parents took place sometime in 1984 or 1985. And after that, mother and daughter disappeared for 42 years. This was a parental abduction, one parent taking the child and erasing the other. Michelle was raised under a different name in another state, and she says she never once suspected she was a kidnapping victim. Her mother eventually remarried, retired to the villages in Florida, and lived under the name Sharon Neely. Picture how ordinary it all looked from the outside. A retiree in a sunny Florida community, a grown daughter with a job and a life, decades of birthdays and holidays, all of it resting on a name that had been invented to bury the truth. To the neighbors, nothing was wrong. To the records, the missing child had ceased to exist. So how does someone stay hidden for that long? For years, the system itself worked against the answer. A Jefferson County custodial interference warrant was issued, and Deborah was once listed among the FBI's most wanted parental kidnapping fugitives. Then the trail went quiet. The case was dismissed in 2000 when prosecutors could not reach Joseph. In 2005, Michelle was removed from the National Missing Children's Database and the warrant recalled, officials said, because of inaccurate information. On paper, the missing girl had simply stopped existing. For a time, it looked as though Michelle had slipped through every crack at once. The warrant was gone. The database listing was gone. To anyone checking the records, there was no missing child to find at all. A family member pushed for a fresh look in 2015, and the case was re-indicted the following year. Even then, the investigation needed a face and a name, not just a paper trail. The real break came in 2025, when a Crime Stoppers tip pointed investigators toward a 66-year-old woman living quietly in Marion County, Florida. What turned a tip into certainty? A United States Marshals Task Force detective compared a recent photograph to an image from 1983, and the resemblance held. Then investigators quietly collected DNA from Deborah's sister back in Louisville. The result was an almost exact match. When officers finally sat Michelle down, they delivered a single sentence that erased her entire history. They told her, "You're not who you think you are. You're Michelle Marie Newton." Imagine being told, in middle age, that the person who raised you had built your whole life on a lie. Deborah Newton was arrested on November 24th, 2025 in Marion County, then extradited to Kentucky and charged with felony custodial interference, a charge that carries no statute of limitations in the state. She appeared voluntarily for arraignment on December 9th, 2025, and a family member posted her bond. A pre-trial conference was set for January the 23rd, 2026. And Michelle herself? She was reunited with her father Joseph on Thanksgiving 2025 in Louisville, the holiday she had spent 42 years missing from his table. Think about what that homecoming actually held, a grown woman meeting a father she could not remember. On the same day families everywhere were gathering, she has said she wants to support both of her parents through whatever comes next, so that everyone in the family can finally begin to heal. The next case began far from any courtroom. on a quiet afternoon outside a hotel where a father looked away for only a moment. Mao Yin. A father stopped to cool a cup of water for his small son. In the seconds it took, the boy was gone, and the search would stretch across 32 years. Mao Yin, nicknamed Jia Jia, was born in 1986 in Xi'an, in China's Shanxi province, the only child of Li Jingji and Mao Zhenjing. On October 17, 1988, his father stopped at a hotel to cool some drinking water for the toddler. In that single moment, the boy was taken from the hotel entrance. What happened to him next is the kind of detail that stays with you. He was sold to a childless couple in neighboring Sichuan province for 6,000 yen, roughly $845. A child's entire identity, traded for the price of a used appliance. Mao Yin grew up in Sichuan as Gu Ningning, with no knowledge of where he came from. He built a perfectly ordinary life and ran a home decoration business. He had reportedly even seen his birth mother on television, appealing for her missing son, without ever once realizing he was that boy. How do you recognize a mother you were far too young to remember? She, on the other hand, never stopped looking. Li Jingji quit her job, handed out more than 100,000 flyers, appeared on numerous television programs, and traveled across more than 20 provinces, chasing every thin lead. In 2007, after 19 years of searching, she joined the volunteer group Baby Come Home. And along the way, she helped 29 other families find their abducted children. She had turned her own grief into a search party for strangers. Every flyer she pinned up carried a face that was no longer a toddler's, only a guess at the man her son might have become. The scale of the problem she was fighting is hard to picture. According to CNN, the volunteer platform lists more than 51,000 registered families hunting for missing children. And China's national DNA database, established in 2009, has reunited more than 6,300 abducted children with their families. So what finally closed the gap for Mao Yin? In late April 2020, Xi'an police received a tip that a man in Sichuan had bought a child from Shanxi back in the late 1980s. Investigators turned to facial recognition technology, modeling Mao Yin's likely adult appearance from a single childhood photograph, and then confirmed the match with DNA testing. Sit with how thin that thread was. A 30-year-old rumor about a purchase, a software prediction of a face nobody had seen grow up, and a vial of blood. Any one of those links could have snapped. Instead, they held, and a man who had spent his life as Gu Ningning learned he had been born Mao Yin. The reunion came at a police news conference in Xi'an on May 18, 2020. The confirming call had arrived 8 days earlier, on May 10th, which happened to be Mother's Day in China. The cruelest and kindest timing imaginable for a woman who had spent decades marking that day with an empty chair. After more than 3 decades apart, mother and son finally stood face to face. Could any reunion ever fill 32 missing years? What does a person even do with 2 lives at once? Mao Yin said he would split his time between Xi'an and the family that had raised him in Sichuan, unsure at first of the road ahead. His birth parents, Li and Mao Zhenjing, had divorced about 4 years after the abduction, 2 lives quietly broken apart by the same loss. As for accountability, authorities said the original abduction remained under investigation at the time of the reunion, and released no information about the couple who had bought and raised him. The next mother would also spend years searching, though the child she was looking for had been carried away by another parent and across an international border. Sabrina Allen. A weekend visit with her mother was supposed to last 2 days. It lasted 12 years. Sabrina Allen was born near Austin, Texas, to Greg Allen and Dara Marie Lawrence, who had divorced. Greg held primary custody, and Lawrence had visitation. On April 19, 2002, Lawrence picked Sabrina up for a scheduled weekend visit and simply never brought her back. She fled with the child to Mexico. The legal response was swift, at least on paper. A Texas warrant for interference with child custody was issued on April 29th, and a federal unlawful flight warrant followed on May 10th. The case was even profiled twice on America's Most Wanted. And still, year after year, nothing. How do you hide a child in plain sight for that long? Sabrina was concealed in Mexico for 12 years and 5 months. She lived under a false name, had her hair dyed, was kept out of school until she fell years behind in her education, and rarely left a small apartment. Worse, her father later said she had been turned against him, fed false and frightening claims about the kind of man he was. By the time she was found, the daughter who had been taken barely resembled the daughter he was searching for. The pair had even come close to discovery in Mexico City in 2003, when police surrounded a house, then lifted their watch and let the trail go cold. That near miss is the part that haunts the case. The authorities had been within yards of her. Then the surveillance ended, the house emptied, and Sabrina vanished back into the country for another 11 years. How many children are lost not because no one looks, but because the search stops a single day too soon? What finally broke a case the authorities had nearly given up on? Greg Allen refused to quit. He made trip after trip to Mexico and hired private investigator Philip Klein, who worked the case for years on his behalf. Where official channels had stalled, a father's stubbornness kept the file open. The breakthrough, when it came, did not arrive through any warrant or broadcast. It came from a single voice willing to talk. Acting on a confidential informant's tip, the FBI, the United States Marshals, Austin Police, and Mexican Federal Police located the pair living in seclusion in Tlaxcala, southeast of Mexico City. Lawrence was arrested on September 30th, 2014. Sabrina, by then a teenager, was found minutes later in good physical health. Lawrence was returned to Texas and held on aggravated kidnapping, with bonds set at $300,000. She pleaded guilty in December 2015 to aggravated kidnapping and interference with child custody. In 2016, she was sentenced to 6 years for the kidnapping and 2 for the custody charge, served at the same time, with credit for the time she had already spent locked up, leaving her eligible for release far sooner than the headline numbers suggested. And Sabrina? She reunited with her father after a careful period working with a clinical psychologist, slowly untangling the false story she had been raised inside. The girl who came back did not simply pick up where the one who left had stopped. She had to learn, almost from scratch, which of the things she believed about her own family were even true. By late 2015, her father reported that she had graduated high school, enrolled in college, and hoped to become a doctor, rebuilding a future that had been stolen from her one weekend at a time. If you have made it this far and you find yourself pulled in by stories like these, take a second to subscribe so you do not miss what is still ahead. There are names in this list you will not be able to shake. The next case also reaches across the Americas, though it began not with a single parent, but inside a place where children were quietly given new names. Victoria Donda. She grew up believing she was one person. As an adult, she learned she had been born to another, inside a place few people ever left alive. Victoria Analia Donda Perez was born in August 1977 inside the ESMA, a secret detention center in Buenos Aires, where her mother, Maria Hilda Perez, was being held during Argentina's military dictatorship. Her mother had been seized months earlier while pregnant. Both of Victoria's parents, militants of the Montoneros, remain disappeared and are presumed to have died. Before they were separated, her mother did something quietly heroic. She named her daughter Victoria and pierced her ears with blue surgical thread, a hidden marker so that the baby might one day be identified and brought home. About 15 days after the birth, Victoria was taken from her mother, who was led away and never seen again. The infant was handed to Juan Antonio Azic, a naval officer attached to the detention center, who registered her as his own daughter under the name Claudia Analia Leonora Azic. A falsified birth certificate sealed the new identity. Then comes the detail that makes this case almost unbearable. Victoria's own paternal uncle, Adolfo Miguel Donda Tigel, himself an officer at that same center, was complicit in handing her over. Her family did not just lose her. A member of it gave her away. Raised under a false name in Avellaneda, she grew up never suspecting the truth, and she became a human rights and anti-poverty activist. How do you spend years fighting for justice without knowing your own story sat at the very center of the cause? The thread that pulled it all loose appeared on July 25, 2003, when the group Abuelas de Plaza de Mayo received a tip. Working alongside the organization HIJOS, made up of the children of the disappeared, Victoria was reluctant at first to disturb the only life she knew. Eventually, she agreed to genetic testing, and on October 8, 2004, Argentina's National Genetic Data Bank confirmed she was the daughter of Maria Hilda and Jose, establishing more than 99% certainty of kinship with the Donda Perez family. She was the 78th grandchild recovered through the organization's work, and the first sibling that HIJOS itself had managed to find. So what happened to the men responsible? Azic was convicted in September 2012 and sentenced to 14 years and 6 months for the abduction and the falsifying of her identity. He later faced further sentences, including for the appropriation of a second baby, has been held under house arrest for health reasons, and courts firmly rejected an attempt to apply a sentence reduction benefit to him. The man who had raised Victoria under a stolen name would answer for far more than her case alone. Her uncle, Donda Tigel, was already serving 2 life sentences for crimes against humanity. On March 4, 2024, he was sentenced to 15 years as a necessary participant in his own niece's abduction. Victoria wrote afterward that although she still did not know where her parents were, she now knew that from that day, they rest in peace. Victoria went on to build a remarkable public life. She served as a national deputy for the city of Buenos Aires from 2007 to 2019, then led the National Anti-Discrimination Institute until late 2022. In February 2023, she was appointed to a strategic political analysis post in the province of Buenos Aires. In 2009, she also published a memoir titled My Name is Victoria, finally claiming in print the name her mother had chosen for her in a cell. There is a strange symmetry to her story. The blue thread her mother tied was meant to identify a baby. Decades later, it was Victoria herself, grown and unafraid, who carried that identity back into the open and made the people who took it answer for what they did. The next case would not turn on decades of searching, but on a single boy who paid very close attention to a passing truck. William Ben Ownby. For years, a Missouri boy was presented to the world as another man's son. It took a passing truck and a friend who remembered it to bring him home. The case centered on Michael John Devlin, a pizzeria manager from Kirkwood, Missouri, who also worked part-time at a funeral home. On October 6, 2002, a boy named Sean Hornbeck was riding his lime green bike near Richwoods when Devlin, driving a white pickup, knocked him off and took him. Devlin then held him at his Kirkwood apartment and presented him to neighbors as his own son. How does a missing child stay missing while living in plain sight? Over time, after deciding the boy would not run, Devlin allowed him to see friends and even use a cell phone. To anyone passing on the street, he looked like an ordinary kid in an ordinary home. He was, the entire time, mistreated and held under threat. Then, on January 8, 2007, a second boy, William Ben Ownby, was taken at a bus stop in Beaufort. Devlin later admitted he had taken Ben because Sean was getting older. But this time, the pattern broke. There was a witness. Ben's friend, Mitchell Holtz, had gotten a long, careful look at the white Nissan pickup as it pulled away. And he gave police a detailed description of the truck and its driver. Could a single teenager's memory really undo years of secrecy? Consider how much rode on one boy's attention. No camera caught the truck, no tip line lit up. The entire investigation rested on what one young witness had noticed in a handful of seconds, and on his ability to repeat it clearly enough for officers to act. It could. The truck description led an FBI tip straight to Devlin's pizzeria in Kirkwood. Agents asked to search his vehicle, and perhaps fatally for his cover, Devlin allowed it. In a strange footnote, the true crime writer Michelle McNamara had publicly suggested a link between the two abductions only a day before the discovery. On January 12, 2007, agents walked into the apartment and found both boys inside, simply playing video games. The numbers behind the rescue are staggering. Sean had been separated from his family for 4 years, 3 months, and 6 days. Reporters quickly named the discovery the Missouri Miracle, in part because so few cases like it ever end this way. 2 families who had braced themselves for the worst got the opposite on the same afternoon. What does justice look like in a case this large? Devlin faced dozens of charges spread across 3 Missouri counties and at the federal level. He pleaded guilty in October 2007 to kidnapping and related crimes, sparing the boys the ordeal of a trial. He is now serving a stack of 74 life sentences and more than 2,000 additional years that, taken together, runs to thousands of years at a Missouri correctional center. A punishment built to ensure he never walks free. In April 2011, he was attacked by another inmate behind bars, but survived. And the 2 boys at the heart of it? Both were reunited with their families in 2007. Ben returned to school and to ordinary life, and a county sheriff later said he had stayed in touch with him many years on, watching the boy from the bus stop grow into a young man. Sean, now an adult, received counseling and tutoring after his rescue, and eventually spoke publicly about what he had endured, choosing to put words to a silence that had lasted far too long. His decision to speak helped other families understand a hard truth, that staying alive sometimes meant staying quiet, and that survival is not the same as surrender. The next case would not end in a courtroom at all. The woman at its center would spend much of her life simply trying to prove who she was. As Monique Smith, she spent decades unable to do the one thing most people never think about. She could not prove she existed. Monique Smith was raised in West Baltimore, in a household that should have been a refuge and instead became something far harder. She was harmed and mistreated by the woman she believed was her mother, and by others around her, through much of her childhood. For years, she had no reason to question who she was. The truth, when it finally surfaced, was almost too large to hold. Smith had been taken as a baby from New York and carried to Baltimore, then raised under an assumed identity. The woman who raised her had falsified documents, enrolled her in school under invented details, and obtained multiple social security cards in different names and birth years. Her entire paper history had been built to hide a single fact. So how does a grown woman discover she was never who she thought? It started with bureaucracy. Smith repeatedly could not obtain a birth certificate, and that one missing document quietly blocked her from joining the Marines, the police academy, and college. Every door she pushed on required proof of a self that did not officially exist. Around her 30s, the discrepancies stopped looking like clerical errors and started looking like a pattern. She concluded she had been abducted. Then she did something extraordinary. She turned herself into her own investigator. Smith submitted her DNA to missing person and genetic genealogy databases, contacted the FBI, was formally logged as a missing child, reached out to the Salvation Army's Missing Persons Program, and hired private investigators of her own. Could one person really crack a case the authorities had never even opened? She refused to accept that she was unknowable. Each rejected application, each form she could not complete, became one more piece of evidence that something had been hidden from her at the very start of her life. Instead of breaking under it, she kept gathering proof. The break came through science and persistence together. The renowned genetic genealogist C.C. Moore identified DNA matches, and a Maryland police officer reached out to her. Slowly, a biological family came into focus, and Smith finally began connecting with siblings she had never known she had. For the first time, the woman with no birth certificate had blood relatives who could confirm she was real. Not every answer arrived. The exact details of her birth name and biological mother remained tangled across different accounts, and she learned that her birth mother had already passed away years earlier, before any reunion was possible. The woman who raised her, meanwhile, refused to explain anything, reportedly insisting she would take the truth to her grave. There would be no neat confession, no tidy ending. What do you do when the system has no place for your story? Smith built one. In 2013, she founded the nonprofit known as Monique to help locate missing children, and she works with the National Missing Children Center to this day. She wrote a memoir about her life, and a copy of that book was placed in the archives of the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture. A permanent record for a woman who once had no records at all. Her story has since reached a wide audience. It became the documentary, The Longest Living Jane Doe, a name drawn from how Smith described herself for so long. A Jane Doe who had been lost since 1967. In 2025, it was adapted into the film Not My Family, the Monique Smith story. Today, she is a mother of 4 who has turned a stolen identity into a lifelong mission for other families still searching. The woman who could not prove she existed has now told her story to millions and made sure it can never be erased again. The next mother would also be told her child was gone for good. She never believed it for a single day. Delamar Vera. A fire was supposed to be the end of her story. Instead, it was the cover for a kidnapping that lasted 6 years. Delamar Vera was born in December 1997 in Philadelphia, to Luz Cuevas and Pedro Vera. When she was only days old, a fire broke out at the family's home. Authorities concluded the newborn had died in the blaze, even though no remains were ever found. For the official record, that was that. But the fire had not taken Delamar. It had hidden her. A distant relative of Pedro Vera, a woman named Carolyn Correa, had taken the newborn and set the fire to mask the abduction. She then raised the child in Willingboro, New Jersey, only about 15 miles away, under the name Aaliyah. Imagine that. The missing baby everyone believed had died was growing up barely a half-hour's drive from the home she had been taken from. Delamar grew up believing Correa was her mother, alongside Correa's other children. She spoke no Spanish, and she reportedly witnessed mistreatment in the home around her. For 6 years, two completely separate truths existed side by side. In Philadelphia, a family grieved a daughter they thought the fire had taken. In New Jersey, that same daughter was being tucked in at night under a stranger's name. Neither side knew the other version was real. So why didn't anyone catch it? Because the case was closed. There was nothing to investigate. No missing child on any list, only a grieving family and a fire report. Everyone had accepted the loss except one person. Luz Cuevas never once believed her daughter was dead. Her conviction is what cracked the whole thing open. On January 24th, 2004, Cuevas crossed paths with a young girl called Aaliyah at a child's birthday party, and she was struck by the resemblance, right down to the family's distinctive dimples. Could a mother really recognize a daughter she had last seen as a newborn? Most people would have dismissed it as wishful thinking, the kind of hope that grief plays on a parent. Cuevas did not. Something in that small face matched the child she had carried, and she trusted it enough to act, quietly and carefully, in a room full of other people. She decided to find out. Telling the girl she had gum stuck in her hair, Cuevas plucked about 5 strands and quietly had them DNA tested. By the end of February 2004, the results were undeniable. The DNA matched Cuevas and Pedro Vera. Aaliyah was Delamar. The reckoning followed quickly. Carolyn Correa, who already had a prior arson conviction, turned herself in and was arrested in 2004 on charges that included kidnapping, arson, and attempted murder. She pleaded no contest to kidnapping-related charges, and in 2005, she was sentenced to between 9 and 30 years. That same year, a New Jersey judge returned custody of the child to Luz Cuevas, with Pedro Vera sharing legal custody. After 6 years of being told her daughter was Ash, Luz finally brought her home. The transition was anything but simple. The little girl who came back did not remember her birth mother, did not speak her language, and had to learn an entire family from scratch. How do you become a daughter again to a stranger, even one who never stopped loving you? And Delamar herself? Now an adult living in Philadelphia, she has spoken openly about therapy and the long work of reclaiming her identity. Her story was told in the documentary Back from the Dead, Who Kidnapped Me? She has said she believes Correa had help that was never charged, an accomplice who walked away. Correa, for her part, served her sentence and declined to take part in the documentary, leaving some of the oldest questions unanswered. The next family would also vanish and start over under invented names. This time, though, it was the very people raising the child who ran. Anthony Joseph Rossini. A young couple checked their records before applying for a job and discovered the parents he loved were wanted by the FBI. He was born Anthony Joseph Rossini on March 8, 1979, on Long Island, to an unmarried couple, Anthony Rossini and Deborah Gardner. He would grow up knowing none of that. He would grow up as Matthew Propp. The unraveling began days after his birth. According to the family's account, Gardner's own father removed the newborn and arranged a private adoption, allegedly pressuring the young mother into signing papers she did not fully understand. The baby was placed with Barry, and Judith Smiley, a married couple from Queens. Gardner soon tried to take back her consent, and the courts agreed with her. The following year, a family court judge ordered the child returned to his biological parents. But when the Rossinis arrived at the Smileys' home to collect him, they found it empty. What had the Smileys done? They had run. They abandoned their jobs, adopted the aliases Bennett and Mary Propp, and moved across the country to Albuquerque, New Mexico, where they raised the boy as Matthew Propp. They built a quiet life as craftspeople and used false social security numbers to hold it all together. Think about the commitment that takes. Two people walked away from their entire existence, their careers, their home, their names, all to keep one child. Whatever else it was not a spur-of-the-moment act. It was a new life, constructed brick by brick on top of a court order they had chosen to ignore. By every account, Matthew had a happy childhood. He believed the Smileys were his parents and had no reason to think otherwise. How long can a secret like that survive once a child becomes an adult with paperwork of his own? Not forever. When Propp, by then a young man, applied to work in law enforcement, questions arose over his birth certificate. Uneasy, the Smileys had their lawyer quietly check for outstanding warrants, and the FBI confirmed the worst. A kidnapping warrant was still active after all those years. The couple finally sat Matthew down and told him the truth. Picture that conversation. A young man, proud and ready to start a career in service, sits down with the two people he trusts most in the world. And they explain that his name, his birth certificate, and the entire shape of his early life were never real. Everything he thought he knew about himself shifted in a single afternoon. To their credit, they did not run again. Barry Smiley flew to New York and surrendered to the Queens District Attorney's Office around the time of Propp's birthday in 2001. He was arraigned for second-degree kidnapping, a charge that carried the possibility of up to 25 years. And Judith Smiley also faced charges and surrendered. In June 2001, Barry pleaded guilty to second-degree kidnapping and was sentenced to between 2 and 6 years in state prison. The judge did not mince words, telling the couple that they were the kidnappers, the ones who had led a false life. The Smileys also agreed not to fight the Rossinis' efforts to recover up to $100,000 in the costs of their long search. What makes this case so strange is where Matthew's loyalty landed. He publicly stood by the couple who had raised him, while also expressing support for the Rossini family he was only beginning to know. He met his biological relatives on Long Island, though his biological mother, then living in the Miami area, chose not to take part. There were no villains in his eyes. Only the two families a single decision had bound together for life. The next case would test something harder than any reunion. It would ask a grown man to choose between the family who raised him and the one he had lost. Peng Chong. He had a job, a house, a car, and a name. Then a phone call told him every piece of it belonged to someone else's plan. Peng Chong came originally from Jiangxi province in southeastern China, though his family moved to Beijing when he was a young child. It was there, while playing alone near a market, that he was lured away and taken. His parents reported him missing, put up posters, and searched for 21 years. He, meanwhile, was raised by a family in Jiangsu province under the name Zhang Kun. He had no idea any of it was false. He simply grew up, found work, made friends, and built an ordinary, settled life. The kind of life that only feels solid until someone tells you it was never really yours. His birth parents, meanwhile, lived in the long limbo every searching family knows. 21 years of posters, of following rumors, of scanning crowds for a face that kept aging in their imagination. They never got to watch him grow, only to wonder what he might look like now. How do you find a child who's been gone for 2 decades and now lives as a stranger? The answer, again, was DNA. In December 2024, police informed Peng that he was originally from Jiangxi, not Jiangsu, and that his birth family had located him through genetic testing. The settled life he knew had a crack running straight through its foundation. He traveled to Beijing to meet his parents and 2 older sisters for the first time in living memory. Back in Jiangxi, relatives welcomed him the way you welcome someone returning from the dead, with fireworks, a banquet, red envelopes, and a cake. After 21 years, the missing boy was home. But here's where Peng's story turns, in a way few others do. Most of these cases end at the reunion. His real decision came afterward. What do you owe the family who raised you when you learn how you came to be raised by them at all? Peng made a clean and startling choice. He severed ties with the family in Jiangsu, quit his job, and transferred his official household registration back to Jiangxi. Then he went further. He sold his home and his car, explaining simply that these things did not belong to him, so he returned them. He walked away from the entire life he had spent years building. It was not an easy or obvious decision. He was giving up friends, a career, and the only home he could remember, trading certainty for a family he had only just met. Many people in his position choose to keep both worlds. Peng chose one, and he chose the one that had been taken from him. In its place, he built something new. Peng became a volunteer, helping other families search for their own missing children, the way his parents had once searched for him. He began selling household goods on social media, and he donated the proceeds from his very first live stream to the same charity that helps reunite abducted children with their families. The boy who had been sold into a new life was now spending his days trying to give other families theirs back. He has described 2025 as his rebirth year, and on December 12th, 2025, he shared an online reflection marking his first full year back with his family. After more than 2 decades as Zhang Kun, he is learning what it means to live openly and on his own terms as Peng Songchong. The final case is the one that set the template for all the others. A boy who not only found his own way home, but carried another child out with him. Stephen Stainer. He came home after years away, and the first thing he did was make sure no other child would have to live what he had lived. Stephen Gregory Stainer was born on April 18, 1965, in Merced, California, one of 5 children of Delbert and Kay Stainer. On December 4, 1972, he was a young boy walking home from school when a man named Irvin Edward Murphy approached him, posing as a representative of a church. Murphy had been recruited by Kenneth Eugene Parnell, and the church story was a lie. Stephen was driven to a cabin in Cathy's Valley in Mariposa County, unaware that he was only a few hundred feet from his own grandfather's home. In an instant, an ordinary walk home became years of captivity. Parnell mistreated Stephen and told him a cruel fiction, that his parents could no longer afford him and had handed over legal custody. He renamed the boy Dennis Gregory Parnell, keeping only his real middle name and birthday, and enrolled him in schools across California while posing as his father. Flyers with Stephen's face circulated for years. How does a child hide in plain sight at school after school and never once be recognized? The answer is that fear can be a kind of cage. Stephen was told he had been given away, and a young child has little reason to doubt the adult in charge of his entire world. So he stayed, and he grew, and the search for the real Stephen Stainer slowly went cold. To classmates and teachers, Dennis Parnell was just another kid whose father moved around a lot. Everything changed when Parnell decided Stephen was getting too old and went looking for a younger boy. On February 14, 1980, Parnell, with the help of a teenager, took a young boy named Timothy White from Ukiah. This time, Stephen refused to let another child endure what he had. Years of his own captivity had taught him exactly what lay ahead for the new boy, and he could not stand by. On March 1, 1980, while Parnell was working a night job, Stephen took Timmy and made his escape, hitchhiking and walking many miles through the dark until he reached a police station. By the next day, Parnell was under arrest, and both boys were returned to their families. Stephen Stainer had not only freed himself, he had carried someone else to safety. What happened to the man responsible? Parnell was convicted in 1981 of kidnapping both boys and sentenced to only about 7 years, serving roughly 5, because most other potential charges fell outside the prosecutor's reach. But the story did not end there. Decades later, in 2004, an elderly Parnell was convicted of attempting to purchase a young child and a related offense, and sentenced to 25 years to life under California's 3 strikes law. Timmy White testified against him. Parnell died behind bars in January 2008. Stephen's own ending is the hardest part of all. He struggled to readjust, married, and had 2 children, and he worked with groups raising awareness about missing kids. He had become, almost by accident, a symbol of the rarest outcome these cases can have: the child who comes back. His story became the well-known television film I Know My First Name is Stephen, in which he even made a brief appearance. Then, on September 16, 1989, Stephen died at 24 when a car turned into the path of his motorcycle in a hit-and-run. The driver was sentenced to only a few months for fleeing the scene. Hundreds attended his funeral. And Timmy White, the boy he had once saved, served as a pallbearer, carrying the person who had carried him. There is one final, painful chapter. Stephen's older brother, Cary Stainer, would years later be convicted of serious crimes near Yosemite and sentenced to death. In late April 2026, the Supreme Court of California denied his appeal, an appeal that had pointed, among other things, to the shadow his brother's abduction had cast over their family for the rest of their lives. Camilla Mobley. In July of 1998, in a hospital room in Jacksonville, Florida, a young first-time mother held her newborn daughter for the first time. She was 16. Her partner was in jail. The room was quiet. A woman in a blue smock with flowers, surgical gloves, and green scrub pants walked in and offered to take the baby for a routine check. 8 hours later, that baby was gone. She would not be found for 18 years. And when she was already an adult, with another name, another mother, and another life. Camilla Mobley was born on July 10, 1998, at University Medical Center in Jacksonville, Florida, now known as UF Health Jacksonville. Her biological mother, Shannara Mobley, was 16. Her biological father, Craig Aiken, was incarcerated for drug possession at the time. 8 hours after her birth, a woman in a blue floral smock and green scrubs entered Shannara's room. Shannara asked her to place the baby in a carrier. Instead, the woman walked out with the 8-pound infant wrapped in a pink and blue blanket. The kidnapper was Gloria Williams, then in her early 30s, who had driven down from South Carolina that day. She later testified she had not driven to Jacksonville intending to abduct anyone. She had recently miscarried in an abusive relationship with a man named Charles Manigo, and believed a baby would stop the violence in her home. Investigators received more than 2,500 tips over the next 2 decades. None of them led anywhere. How does a hospital let someone walk out the front door with a newborn? Nobody knows. Williams took the baby to Walterboro, South Carolina, and renamed her Alexis Kelly Manigault. She forged a birth certificate and obtained a social security number using the identity of a deceased Virginia man. The baby was raised alongside Williams's two other children and graduated from Colleton County High School. By every account, the household was warm. Camilla herself has insisted that Williams gave her everything she needed. The cracks showed up in 2015 when Camilla, then 16, could not produce a social security card or a birth certificate to apply for a job. Williams confessed to her in private. Camilla was reportedly told her true identity about a year and a half before law enforcement learned of it. Could a teenager really sit on a secret like that, knowing the woman who raised her was the woman who took her? In 2016, 2 anonymous tips were sent to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, naming a young woman in South Carolina as baby Camilla. On January 13, 2017, Jacksonville police followed those tips to Walterboro. A DNA sample taken at her birth was matched to a swab from the young woman. The reunion happened the next day at the Walterboro Police Department. At a detention center separated from Williams by mesh, Williams blew her a kiss, and Camilla sobbed. "I love you, Mama." Shannara wrote on Facebook that she was hurting, like the 16-year-old little girl all over again. Williams was extradited to Florida and charged with kidnapping and interference with custody. In February of 2018, she pleaded guilty. On June 8, 2018, Judge Marianne Aho sentenced her to 18 years in prison. 1 year for each year Camilla had been gone, plus 5 years concurrent for custodial interference. A civil suit by Shannara against the hospital settled for around $1.5 million. Today, Camilla is 27 and moved to Florida in 2019 to live with her biological family. She has strengthened her relationship with her 3 half-sisters and attended one sister's wedding. She calls Craig Aiken Daddy. Her relationship with Shannara remains, in her own words, a roller coaster. She still calls Gloria Williams her mother. Williams is housed at the Lowell Correctional Institution Annex in Ocala, with a scheduled release date of July 23, 2032. The case was reopened in September of 2025 after Williams filed an amended motion to withdraw her guilty plea, citing ineffective counsel. Williams is reportedly pursuing a master's degree in business administration while incarcerated. The case was dramatized in Lifetime's Stolen by My Mother, the Camilla Mobley story in 2020, starring Niecy Nash. But the next case would unfold even closer to home, just 45 miles away from a mother who had no idea her daughter was within driving distance the whole time. Carlina White. In August of 1987, a teenage couple from Harlem rushed their 19-day-old daughter to the emergency room. The baby had a fever of 104 degrees. They sat with her through the night. A woman in scrubs comforted them, told them everything would be fine, encouraged them to go home and rest. Hours later, the baby was gone. The hospital cameras had not been working. The case would go unsolved for 23 years, and it would not be solved by the police, by the FBI, or by any tip line. It would be solved by the missing baby herself, sitting at a computer. Carlina Renee White was born on July 15, 1987, in Harlem, to Joy White and Carl Tyson, both teenagers. At 19 days old on August 4, 1987, she developed a high fever caused by infection from fluid swallowed during birth and was rushed to Harlem Hospital Center. A woman dressed as a nurse, who had hung around the hospital for 3 weeks, comforted the parents through the night. Between 2:30 and 3:55 in the morning, someone removed Carlina's IV line and abducted her. The hospital's video surveillance system was not working. The kidnapper was Anugeta Petway, born around 1962 in Connecticut, who had a history of larceny convictions and multiple miscarriages. She told the FBI she had taken a train from Connecticut to Harlem and walked out with the baby. U.S. Attorney Preet Bharara would later say at her arraignment that nothing could compensate for what had been stolen. How could a hospital sleep on a stranger walking the halls in a nurse's uniform for 3 weeks? Petway raised Carlina as Nedstra Nettie Nance in Bridgeport, Connecticut, just 45 miles from her parents. Petway later had a son, Trayvon, in 1998, whom Carlina believed was her brother. The household was unstable. Carlina later told the New York Post that Petway hit her and threw shoes at her. At 16, Carlina told the Connecticut Department of Children and Families that she suspected Petway was not her biological mother. Nothing came of it. In 2005, while pregnant with her own daughter, Samani, Carlina asked Petway for her birth certificate. Petway produced a forged Connecticut document that authorities recognized as fake. Petway then admitted she was not Carlina's mother, but lied that Carlina had been given to her by a drug-addicted woman. By December of 2010, Carlina was 23. Searching the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children website, she found that an infant photo of the missing Carlina resembled images of her own daughter, Samani. A birthmark on her arm sealed the recognition. Petway's sister, Cassandra Johnson, helped Carlina contact NCMEC. Joy and Carlina met in New York on January 15, 2011. DNA confirmed the match. The case was the longest infant kidnapping NCMEC had ever resolved at the time, and the first ever solved by the missing person herself. Petway turned herself in to the FBI in Bridgeport on January 23, 2011. She pleaded guilty to a federal kidnapping charge in February of 2012. On July 30, 2012, Judge P. Kevin Castell sentenced her to 12 years, saying she had inflicted a parent's worst nightmare. Carl Tyson said the sentence should have been 23 years for the years she stole. Petway was released on April 14, 2021, after about 9 years and 8 months at FCI Aliceville in Alabama. Today, Carlina goes by Nettie, explaining it is what she gave herself, neither what the Petways nor the Whites gave her. She lives in Atlanta and is self-employed as an entrepreneur. Her daughter, Samani, who was the unintentional reason the case ever broke open, turned 18 in 2023 and reportedly enlisted in the Army. Joy White's family had received a $750,000 settlement against Harlem Hospital in 1992, with half held in trust for Carlina if found before age 21. She was found at 23. The trust was forfeited. Carlina told the Mirror in 2014 that she writes Petway in prison, saying that holding on to anger would have stopped her from living. The case was dramatized in Lifetime's Abducted, the Carlina White story in 2012, starring Keke Palmer. But the next case would cross an ocean, and a small selfie taken between schoolgirls in Cape Town would do what police had failed to do for almost 2 decades. Zephany Nurse. In April of 1997, in a hospital ward in Cape Town, South Africa, a teenage mother lay recovering from emergency surgery. Beside her, in a small cot, was the daughter she had just delivered. Across the ward, a woman in a maroon nurse's uniform was making the rounds, smiling at every new mother on the floor. She had come in pretending to be staff. She left 2 days later with a baby that was not hers. The case would haunt the country for almost 18 years. The break would come from a girl walking through a high school hallway, and a friendship between two strangers who happened to be sisters. On the morning of April 28, 1997, 17-year-old Celeste Nurse delivered Zephany Nurse by emergency cesarean at Groote Schuur Hospital. Father Morn Nurse, Celeste's young husband, was a working-class teenager from Mitchell's Plain. 2 days later, on April 30th, Zephany was abducted from her cot beside Celeste's bed, while her mother slept under the fog of morphine. The kidnapper, in a maroon nurse's uniform, had befriended other mothers in the ward beforehand. Investigators later recovered a pillow used to fake a pregnancy in a hospital tunnel that had unrestricted street access. The kidnapper was LaVonna Solomon, a Lavender Hills seamstress in her early 30s who had recently miscarried and faked a pregnancy. Court testimony later established she had wanted a baby so her partner Michael would marry her. Husband Michael Solomon was an electrician who said he never knew the child was not his. Each year on April 28th, the Nurse family held a quiet party for the absent birthday girl. How do you keep a candle burning for almost 2 decades when nothing comes back to you? Zephany was raised as Miche Solomon in Lavender Hill, only kilometers from her biological family. LaVonna enrolled her at school using fabricated birth documents. Detective Mike Barkhuizen would later recall the moment investigators verified there was no record of the child's purported birth at a retreat clinic. Daily life with LaVonna was loving and stable. She was a worship leader at her church. Miche believed her birthday was April 30th, the day she had actually been taken. For the Nurse family, the years dragged on. Celeste and Morn had to live with community accusations swirling for nearly 2 decades that they had somehow lost the baby on their own watch. In July of 2009, the nurses received an extortion call traced to a neighbor who was given 3 years house arrest, a fine, and community service for the cruelty. In January of 2015, Cassidy Nurse, Zephany's biological sister, started at Swanswyck High School. Miche was a student at the same school under her other name. Despite a 4-year age gap, classmates commented on the resemblance, and the two struck up a friendship. A selfie shown to Cassidy's parents was the moment of impact. On February 25, 2015, LaVonna Solomon was arrested. DNA testing confirmed Miche was Zephany. Miche later told the BBC her life was out of control. Celeste, her biological mother, was simultaneously diagnosed with stage 3B cervical cancer, and the strain of the abduction had already destroyed Celeste and Morn's marriage. Their divorce was finalized the very same month Miche was found. Trial began in August of 2015 at the Western Cape High Court. Solomon claimed she had paid a woman named Sylvia 3,000 rand at Winburg railway station. No such adoption was ever proven. On March 10, 2016, she was convicted on all 3 counts. On August 15, 2016, she was sentenced to 14 years, with 4 suspended 10 years direct imprisonment. She served her time at Worcester Female Prison. She was released on August 18, 2023, having served 7 years. Husband Michael filed for divorce while she was incarcerated. Zephany, now Miche Zephany Sheldon, works as a bookkeeper in Cape Town. On March 21, 2023, she married teacher Justin Sheldon at Justenburg Vlakte. Both mourned nurse and Michael Solomon walked her down the aisle. On the day of Lavagna's release, Misha moved out of the Solomon home and posted, "The cord has now been cut." She told the Mirror in 2024 she does not see the mother who raised her as criminal and evil. Celeste's cancer is in remission. Celeste and Morn remarried in November of 2020. But the next case would have a far stranger turn, where the boy who came back was not the boy who had been taken. Paul Fronczak. In April of 1964, in Chicago, a young couple welcomed their first child. The baby was just 1 day old when a woman in a nurse's uniform walked into the mother's room and said the doctor needed to examine him. She walked out with the baby and disappeared, apparently into a taxi. A year later, a toddler was found abandoned in a stroller on a sidewalk in Newark, New Jersey. The FBI told the family this was their son. They took him home. He grew up. Decades later, a DNA test would tell a different story, that the boy in the stroller had never been their son at all, and that their real son had spent his life 2 states away under another name. Paul Joseph Fronczak was born on April 26, 1964, at Michael Reese Hospital, Chicago, to Dora and Chester Fronczak. On April 27, 1964, when the baby was a day old, a woman in nurse's attire told Dora the doctor needed to examine him and disappeared, apparently into a taxi. The case sparked the largest manhunt in Chicago history at that time, with examiners checking 10,000 babies. The FBI was given everything they had on the woman in the nurse's uniform, but no good leads emerged. On July 2, 1965, a male toddler was found abandoned in a pushchair in Newark, New Jersey, and the FBI told the Fronczaks he might be Paul. The family traveled to identify him by matching ear shape and adopted him without genetic proof. DNA testing of that caliber would not be widely available for another quarter of a century. How does a family raise a child for 50 years on the assumption that an FBI guess was right? The boy raised as Paul grew up in Oak Lawn, Illinois, feeling like an outsider in his own family. At 10, he found a box of newspaper clippings about the kidnapping in the family's crawl space. He served in the military, became an actor with a stand-in role for George Clooney in Ocean's 11, and had a daughter, Emma. The doubt never went away. In 2012, he took an identigen DNA test that proved no possibility he was the Fronczaks' biological child. On June 3, 2015, C.C. Moore's volunteer DNA detectives identified him as Jack Thomas Rosenthal of Atlantic City, born October 27, 1963, with a missing twin sister, Jill Lynn Rosenthal. Witnesses described the Rosenthal twins as neglected, sometimes kept in a near-empty room or in a cage. Both Rosenthal parents had died of cancer in the 1990s. He told the BBC his real parents were really not very nice people, and that being abandoned by them had saved his life. So if he was Jack Rosenthal, who was the real Paul Fronczak? The actual perpetrator of the 1964 hospital kidnapping was never charged. Investigators came to suspect Lorraine Fountain, who had moved to Arkansas during a relationship with a Chicago doctor and returned with a baby raised as Kevin Beatty. Fountain died in 2004. The real Paul had grown up as Kevin Ray Beatty in Manton, Michigan, with a fake birthday of March 14, 1964. He played basketball, fathered 3 daughters, and worked as a machinist. Years later, a daughter of Kevin Beatty submitted DNA that linked her father to Chester and Dora Fronczak. The FBI confirmed the identification. The news broke publicly in December of 2019. Dora, by then widowed, Chester had died in 2017. Spoke with Kevin by phone for the first time in 55 years. Paul recalled that moment as the most meaningful of the journey. Kevin had spent his first 10 years in Chicago, then moved to Manton, Michigan, worked as a machinist, and fathered 3 daughters. Kevin Ray Beatty died of cancer on April 25, 2020, on his real 56th birthday, before an in-person meeting could happen. The man raised as Paul now goes by Paul Jack Frunzak and lives in Henderson, Nevada. Jill Lynn Rosenthal remains missing and possibly alive. In September of 2022, NCMEC released an age progression image of her at 58. The CNN Films documentary The Lost Sons aired in 2021. But the next case would dwarf even that one, in the sheer length of the silence. Luis Armando Albino. In February of 1951, in a small park in West Oakland, California, 2 young brothers were playing on a winter afternoon. The older brother, Roger, was watching the younger one. A woman walked up. She was friendly. She was speaking Spanish. She offered the smaller boy candy. He followed. By the time anyone realized, he was gone. He was 6 years old. His mother would search for him for the rest of her life. He would not be found until he was nearly 80. A niece would solve the case from a couch with a DNA kit she had ordered for fun. And the brother, who had been playing with him in the park that day, would die. 2 months after seeing him again, Luis Armando Albino was abducted on February 21, 1951, from a West Oakland park, Jefferson Square Park at 7th Street, and what is now Martin Luther King Jr. Way. He was 6, playing with his 10-year-old brother, Roger. A woman promised him candy in Spanish and lured him away. Roger had only stepped away for a few moments. By the time he turned back, his brother was gone. Luis was Puerto Rican. The family had moved from Puerto Rico the year before. His mother, Antonia Albino, was a single mother who didn't speak English and worked multiple jobs. The original investigation was massive. Police, soldiers from a local army base, the Coast Guard, and city employees searched San Francisco Bay. They knocked on doors, they drained ponds, they turned up nothing. How do you keep going for 54 years when every door has closed? The kidnapper flew Luis to the East Coast, where he was raised by a couple as their own son. He served 2 tours in Vietnam as a Marine. He became a firefighter, then a retired one. He had children. He had grandchildren. The couple raising him had told him a story about his origins that he had no reason to question. He had a birth certificate. He had a social security number. He had a normal life, on a normal street, in a normal town that no public reporting has ever named. Antonia, on the other side of the country, visited the Missing Persons Bureau almost daily, then weekly, then annually, making multiple trips to Puerto Rico to look. She would stop strangers on the street if she thought a man's eyes looked like her son's. She kept his photograph on her wall. She kept his clothing. She died in 2005 at 92, insisting until her last breath that her son was alive. Could a mother really be right after 54 years of dead ends? The breakthrough came from the next generation. Alida Aliquin, 63, Luis's niece in Oakland in 2020, took an online DNA test just for fun and got a 22% match with a man on the East Coast. She held on to it. In 2024, she returned to the Oakland Public Library to compare microfilm photos of Luis and the East Coast man. The faces were the same. Oakland police reopened the case. DNA samples from Albino's siblings were collected with help from the California DOJ and the FBI. On June 20th, 2024, the match was confirmed. 4 days later, on June 24th, Luis flew to Oakland. He hugged his niece and said, "Thank you for finding me." On June 25th, they drove to Roger's home in Stanislaus County. Two brothers who had last seen each other on a park bench in 1951 sat together on a couch in 2024. Luis returned in July for a 3-week visit. Roger died of cancer in August of 2024, about 2 months after their reunion. No charges have been filed. The kidnapper is reportedly deceased. Family told KTVU the woman who raised Luis has since died. Oakland police closed the missing persons case, but the FBI's kidnapping investigation remains open. Luis has chosen privacy and has not given any television interview. His East Coast hometown has not been disclosed. The story broke nationally on September 20th, 2024, in the Mercury News, then carried by the Associated Press, NPR, NBC News, CNN, and CBS News. It is the longest-running successful resolution of an American child abduction case on record. Antonia, the woman who had refused to give up for 54 years, was no longer there to see it. Her son had come home. If you've made it this far and enjoy deep dives into the most shocking criminal cases, hit that subscribe button and don't forget to press the bell icon. Melissa Highsmith. In August of 1971, in Fort Worth, Texas, a young waitress placed an ad in the local newspaper. She needed a babysitter for her toddler daughter. She had 2 jobs to juggle and not enough money to keep up. A woman called the number, gave a name, missed the in-person interview, and convinced the mother by phone to hand over the child anyway. The babysitter arrived at the door in long white gloves and white clothing, like a nurse. She took the toddler, the diapers, and the clothing, and walked out the door. The mother would spend the next 51 years being accused by neighbors and even her own community of having killed her daughter herself. Melissa Suzanne Highsmith was born on November 6th, 1969, in Fort Worth. Her mother, 22-year-old waitress Alta Pantenko, placed an ad in the Fort Worth Star-Telegram for a babysitter. A woman calling herself Ruth Johnson answered the ad and convinced Apantenko by phone to hire her sight unseen. On August 23, 1971, Apantenko's roommate handed Melissa to the woman, who was wearing long white gloves and dressed all in white, like a nurse at the Spanish Gate Apartments on East Seminary. The woman also took diapers and clothing and never returned. 2 weeks later, Apantenko ran a front-page plea in the Star-Telegram, begging the kidnapper to call. For decades, Apantenko endured community accusations that she had killed her own daughter. How does a mother defend herself for 51 years against a charge no one will write down? Melissa was raised just 20 minutes from her biological mother in Fort Worth under the names Melanie Miyoko, then Melanie Walden, then Melanie Brown by marriage. She was told a fabricated story that she had been born at home, suffered brain damage, and that her father was somewhere in Japan, explaining the surname Miyoko. She had no reason to question the story. There were no photographs of her as an infant in the family album. There were no relatives to compare faces with. The home was harsh. She ran away at 15 and did what she had to do to get by on the streets, describing her childhood as a lie. According to her father, the woman who raised her later confessed she had bought Melissa for $500 on the street. Across town, Apantenko was raising another daughter, holding fundraisers, putting up flyers, and growing older with a hole in her family no one could fill. Both of Melissa's biological parents had submitted DNA to 23andMe years before. The service linked Jeffrey Highsmith's sample to those of Melissa's 3 children. Sister Victoria Highsmith said the family found Melissa within 3 weeks once the children's DNA was uploaded. They couldn't change Melissa's DNA. They could only change her identity. The family reached out via Facebook. Melissa, then 53, thought it was a scam. She agreed only after a long phone call with her brother. She took a confirmatory DNA test that her brother paid for. She met her parents in person on Saturday, November 26, 2022, the day after Thanksgiving. Fort Worth police confirmed the DNA match in May of 2023. Was a phone call enough to undo half a century of being told the wrong story? The criminal statute of limitations had expired in 2007. No charges will ever be filed. Father Jeffrey Highsmith said the kidnappers stole 51 years of my joy. Melissa has said she doesn't want charges, only answers. The Ruth Johnson identity has never been formally identified. In May of 2023, Melissa stood before a Tarrant County judge to legally change her name back to Melissa Highsmith. The courtroom gave her a standing ovation. She and her mother spent their first Mother's Day together since the reunion. Melissa cut off contact with the woman who had raised her. She runs the Facebook page, Melissa's Voice, advocating for missing person cases. The family campaigns for removing the statute of limitations on kidnapping. The case has been featured on Investigation Discovery's Crime Feed, Kendall Ray's True Crime Show on Apple TV, and in People magazine. The case has renewed hope for other Fort Worth cold cases that families had nearly given up on. But the next case would unfold not on the mainland, but on the windward shore of an island, where a baby's empty stroller turned up at a bus stop and a mother walked away into a story no one has been able to finish. Mark's Panama Barns. In June of 1977, on the windward shore of Oahu, a young father came home to discover his 5-month-old son was gone. The baby's mother had walked out with him that morning. The empty stroller was found a few hours later at a bus stop on a state highway. Days later, the mother turned up squatting in a stranger's home on the opposite side of the island, holding the baby and giving police false names for them both. She was committed to a psychiatric facility, then released, then vanished. The boy was placed in state care under the false identity she had given. 34 years would pass before he discovered, with one click on a missing persons website, that he was the missing child on his own screen. Mark's Panama Moriarty Barnes was born January 17, 1977, in Hawaii. He was abducted on June 21, 1977, from Hauula on the windward shore of Oahu. Charlotte Marcella Moriarty, his mother, took the 5-month-old infant from the family residence on Hanemoa Street around 9 that morning. The empty stroller was found a few hours later at a bus stop on Kamehameha Highway. Charlotte and Mark Barnes, a journalist and Vietnam veteran, had never married, and there was no formal custody dispute. Mark told one online forum that after Charlotte brought Mark's home from the hospital, she wore a blindfold day and night for 3 weeks. Early evidence of severe mental instability. Days after walking off, Charlotte turned up squatting in a stranger's home on the opposite side of Oahu and gave Honolulu police the false names Jane Amia and Tenzin Amea for herself and the baby. She was committed to a psychiatric facility, then vanished after discharge, leaving the baby in state custody under that false identity. Her whereabouts remain unknown to this day. How do you connect a baby in state care to a missing persons report when the names on the two files do not match? Because Hawaii authorities couldn't connect Tenzin Amiya with the missing persons report Mark filed about 20 days later, the boy became a ward of Hawaii and was placed in an orphanage roughly 30 miles from his biological father's home. Around 1981, Steve and Pat Carter of New Jersey adopted him, renamed him Steve Carter, and raised him in southern New Jersey. He always knew he was adopted, but his birth certificate had been created when he was already a year old. His fair complexion didn't match the supposed Hawaiian roots. The story he had been given did not add up. A DNA kit given to him by his wife Tracy revealed Scandinavian ancestry, heightening his curiosity. Then he saw the news. In 2011, Steve was watching CNN's coverage of Carlina White's case. On a hunch, he visited missingkids.com and filtered for Hawaii, missing 34 years, male. The first hit was an age progression image of Mark's Panama Moriarty Barnes. Charlotte's daughter, Jennifer Monheimer, had pushed authorities to create the image in 2001. Steve looked at it for a long time. The face was his own. He contacted Honolulu police and submitted DNA in February of 2011. About 8 months later, in October of 2011, the lab confirmed the match. He first telephoned half-sister Jennifer, then his biological father Mark Barnes, who was by then back in California. How does a man rebuild a relationship with a father he never knew he had? No prosecution has ever followed. Charlotte's whereabouts are still unknown. Her sister is seeking a court declaration of legal death. The case files are open at Honolulu Police Department case number F50056. Steve still lives on the East Coast with his wife Tracy, working in medical software in the Philadelphia area. About his mother, Charlotte, he has been remarkably generous. He hopes she is healthy, says he doesn't blame her, and wishes her the best. It is a striking position to take toward a woman who walked off with a baby and never came back. But Steve has said again and again that he had a happy life with the parents who raised him in New Jersey, and that whatever Charlotte had been going through that morning in 1977 was beyond her own control. He has appeared on The View, The Tom Ron Hall Show, and the docu-series Gone in 2017. Retrospectives on his case appeared in LAD Bible in 2024 and 2025. He keeps a deliberately low public profile, but the next case would involve a custody fight, an angry parent, and a Google search by a teenager that solved the case the moment it loaded. Ore Steinman. In May of 1989, in Red Deer, Alberta, a young father was 11 days away from being granted full custody of his 2-year-old son. His ex-partner had agreed to terms. The court date was on the calendar. A few days before that hearing was supposed to take effect, the mother packed up her son, cleared out, and left the country. They went first to Mexico, then to Los Angeles, where she changed names again and again. The boy grew up calling himself by a different last name, in a different city, on a different continent. 14 years later, he sat down at a school computer to look up his own first name out of curiosity. The first thing that came up was his face. Ore Jules Joseph Steinman's biological mother, Giselle Marie Goudreau, took him from Red Deer, Alberta, on May 28, 1989, 11 days after a court order awarded full custody to biological father Rodney "Rod" Steinman, effective June 1, 1989. Goudreau and Steinman had never married. Goudreau had concealed Ore's birth from his father for several months. Rod was an electrician living in Ponoka, Alberta. His mother, Linda Steinman, worked at a Ponoka supermarket. Goudreau took Auré first to Mexico, then in approximately 1995 settled in the Los Angeles area, where she changed names frequently and eventually worked as an administrative assistant at the Los Angeles Unified School District. How do you cross two countries with a stolen toddler and disappear into a major American city for 14 years? Auré was raised under the name Auré Torres in the San Fernando Valley. Goudreau told neighbors that Auré's father had left home years ago. Goudreau was a famously attentive single mother. Neighbors described her world as taking care of her son. Auré was a strong student who won awards for scholastic achievement and student leadership, excelled in sports, and was active in his church. On the surface, the household looked like the most ordinary thing in the valley. In February of 2003, Auré, then 16, was at school messing around with a Google search of his unusual first name. The first hit was a missing child profile with a photo of him as a toddler and the name of his abductor. He stared at the screen. The toddler in the photograph was him. The name listed as the abductor was his mother. He confided in a teacher, police, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and the Missing Children Society of Canada conducted a roughly year-long investigation before moving on the household, careful to verify everything before disrupting the life Auré had built. On February 11, 2004, U.S. Marshals arrested Goudreau at her Chatsworth home in front of her then 17-year-old son. He tried to comfort her as she was led away. Auré was placed in a Los Angeles County foster home, pending resolution. Could a teenager really turn his life upside down with one click on a school computer? Goudreau was extradited to Canada and tried in Red Deer Provincial Court. On January 5, 2005, Judge David Pluss convicted her of child abduction in contravention of a custody order. On February 9, 2005, she was sentenced to 2 months in jail. The Crown explicitly requested a light sentence so that she could return to California to be with her son. Defense counsel filed appeals to be heard in June of 2005. The outcome of those appeals was not part of the public reporting. As of last reporting, Auré had graduated from a Los Angeles high school in June of 2004, was attending college, and had applied for U.S. citizenship. He was in regular phone contact with his mother, but had not seen her since the extradition. He had spoken with his father Rod by phone, but had not met him in person since 1989. His grandmother summed up the family's reaction. Nothing is going to bring back the last 15 years. Both Auré and Goudreau have effectively retreated from public view since 2005. Auré would now be approximately 39. He has likely continued to use a different surname and has avoided public attention. No verifiable update on his life since has emerged in the public record. But the next case would mirror this one closely. Only this time, the parent who took the child would not be the mother, and the discovery would come from a college application that wouldn't process. Julian Hernandez. In August of 2002, in Vestavia Hills, Alabama, a young couple was ending their relationship. They had a 5-year-old son. The father agreed to take him to preschool one Wednesday morning. He didn't come home. He had drained his bank accounts, packed the boy's baby blanket and stuffed orca whale, and driven 10 hours north. The boy would grow up in a city where his father had no apparent ties, with a new name, a fake birth certificate, and a younger half-sister he loved. 13 years later, he tried to apply to college. The Social Security number kept being rejected. A guidance counselor went looking for the reason and found his face on a missing children's database. Julian Tiberius Hernandez was born in 1997 and abducted at age 5 on Wednesday, August 28, 2002, from Vestavia Hills, Alabama. His parents, biological mother, whose name has been withheld at her request, through attorney Gloria Allred, and biological father Bobby Hernandez had never married. No formal custody order existed. The couple was ending their relationship. Bobby, a U.S. Navy veteran born September 3, 1962, agreed to take Julian to preschool. Instead, he packed Julian's baby blanket and stuffed orca whale, drained his bank accounts, and disappeared. According to Cuyahoga County prosecutors, Bobby had threatened to take Julian if the relationship ever ended. How does a father walk away with a kindergartner and stay invisible for 13 years? Bobby drove 10 hours to Cleveland, Ohio, where he had no apparent ties. He created the alias Jonathan Mangina for himself and JJ Mangina for his son. He moved them through low-rent apartments. He took odd jobs. He kept the boy out of any public school for years. In March of 2012, he obtained Ohio identification under the alias and falsified Julian's birth certificate to enroll him in school. Julian thrived. He became a straight-A honors student and athlete pursuing martial arts at Lakewood High School in suburban Cleveland. He lived with Bobby, Bobby's fiancée, her 3 children, and a younger half-sister. Julian was told only that his parents had broken up, and his mother lived somewhere else. At sentencing, he later explained, "I never questioned it any further because I didn't really care. My father was there, and he was all I ever needed." In the fall of 2015, 18-year-old Julian's Social Security number kept being returned as incorrect as he applied to colleges. His Lakewood High guidance counselor researched it. Layer by layer, the document chain fell apart. Bobby had used a deceased man's identity to forge the records. The counselor discovered Julian's name and photo in the NCMEC database, where his mother had kept the file open for 13 years. On October 30th, 2015, the FBI Cleveland office got a tip. Within 3 days, Julian was identified. On November 2nd, 2015, Bobby Hernandez was arrested. Julian's mother was happy but hesitant after 13 years of false leads. Through her attorney Gloria Allred, she described considering suicide during her darkest moments. Julian asked the press to respect his privacy and let him be a normal 18-year-old. He visited his biological mother in Alabama at Thanksgiving and Christmas of 2015. How does a son ask the court for mercy on the man who took him from his mother? On November 24th, 2015, Cuyahoga County indicted Bobby on 32 counts, including 6 counts of kidnapping. On March 14th, 2016, he pleaded guilty to 2 kidnapping counts, 10 tampering with records counts, 2 interference with custody counts, and 1 forgery count, facing up to 54 years. At the April 13th, 2016 sentencing, Julian asked Judge Cassandra Collier Williams to spare his father, saying he forgave him and the time spent with him was the only time he had truly felt at home. Bobby was sentenced to 4 years of actual prison time plus 5 years of supervised release. Per the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Correction, Bobby was admitted on April 19, 2016, served at Marion Correctional Institution, and was released through judicial release in 2019. Julian, now 28, has continued to maintain his stated wish for privacy, and there have been no major news updates since. Per Allred, He was in regular contact with both his mother and father at the time of release. But the next case would be the only one in which the recovered children, now grown, refused to come home at all. Bobby and Christy Baskin. In March of 1989, in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, a young pastor and his wife realized something had gone terribly wrong. Their 2 young children had been staying with the wife's parents while the couple settled into seminary life in Kentucky. When they tried to take their children back, the grandparents refused. They went to court. They alleged a satanic cult. They alleged abuse. The investigations cleared the parents. 8 days before the final hearing, the grandparents sold their cars, emptied their bank accounts, and disappeared with both children. 20 years later, the children would be adults living in California under different names, and they would refuse to come home. Catherine Christine Christy Baskin and Robert Maple Bobby Baskin were taken on March 1st, 1989, from Murfreesboro, Tennessee. The biological parents were Mark Baskin, a Southern Baptist Seminary student, and Debbie Baskin nee Maple. The abductors were Debbie's parents, Marvin Leroy Maple and Sandra Kuykendall Maple. In January of 1988, the Baskins had agreed to let Marvin and Sandra temporarily care for the 2 children, while Mark settled into a master's program at Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky. When Debbie tried to take her children back, the relationship collapsed. On May 5th, 1988, the Maples petitioned for custody before Judge Robert Corlew II, alleging Mark and Debbie were members of a satanic cult. Investigators, including Murfreesboro detective Anita Flagg, found no evidence supporting the abuse claims. 8 days before the final hearing with the Baskins cleared, the Maples sold their cars, emptied bank accounts, and disappeared. Local kidnapping warrants were issued March 13, 1989. The Maples had reportedly been advised by Faye Yeager, an Atlanta activist who ran an underground network for allegedly abused children. Could a grandparent really turn the very system designed to protect a child into the tool that takes them away? After an Unsolved Mysteries broadcast in February of 1990, the family was briefly traced to Santa Clara, California, where they were living as Ray and Sandra Farmer with the children renamed Robin and Robbie. They vanished again. They eventually settled in San Jose under the aliases John and Frances Bunting, with the children renamed Jennifer and Jonathan Bunting. The Maples homeschooled the children, a deliberate choice that prevented Social Security and registration questions. Christy, now Jenny, became a nurse working in nursing administration and lived single with her grandfather. Bobby, now John, married and had children of his own. What they had been told about why they were on the run is the most contested part of the case. John insists the Maples told them the truth, that their parents had abused them, that he remembers the abuse vividly, and that the Maples gave them a choice to stay or go, and they chose to leave their parents. The Baskins, supported by official investigations that cleared them, dispute these accounts entirely. Sandra Maple died in March of 2006 without ever being charged. After her death, an aging Marvin began confiding in friends about the abduction. After a January 12, 2009, piece in the San Diego Union Tribune, 2 anonymous witnesses recognized John Bunting from an age-progressed image and contacted authorities. On February 2, 2009, San Jose police arrested Marvin at age 73. Christy was 28. Bobby was 27. Mark and Debbie Baskin flew to San Jose immediately, but were not allowed contact. Christy and Bobby referred to the Maples as their parents and refused to meet. Mark told reporters at the airport, remember the good times you had living with us as children. We still love you and want a relationship with you. A Tennessee judge dismissed the kidnapping warrant as legally flawed. On May 22, 2009, Marvin Maple entered a best interest plea to 2 counts of custodial interference and was sentenced to 4 years of supervised probation with no prison time. Mark Baskin called it so close and yet so far. After completing probation, Marvin returned to Murfreesboro and was placed in a nursing home with dementia. Marvin L. Maple died on May 26, 2016, at age 80 in Murfreesboro. In May of 2017, John Bunting gave his only public interview to WSAV-TV, insisting the abuse was real to him and that there was no possibility of reunion. Christy has never spoken publicly. Mark and Debbie Baskin remain in Southeast Georgia, where Mark teaches and pastors a small Baptist church. Mark told WSAV he believed they would see their children again, perhaps not on Earth. This was all from our side today. Thanks for watching. Click here to check out another video.